Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Back with another forecast discussion today. We haven't done one in a while, but we do have a potential severe weather event upcoming here this weekend, particularly starting Sunday into early next week, and potentially beyond. So thought it would be a good idea, even though we don't usually do forecast discussions several days out from an event, thought it would be a good idea to kind of go through the current state of the atmosphere and then look at some model data and compare and contrast some different models and see and take a look at the discrepancies among the models at this point. Looks like a pretty potent system. Just as kind of an initial statement on the system, it looks like, if this was in May, this would be a pretty significant severe weather outbreak, but we are looking at some negatives as far as severe weather chances go with this system. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. This is the SPC outlook, day 4 through 8 outlook. They have drawn in a 15% contour here for day 4. From places like western Iowa into far eastern Nebraska, down through northeast Kansas, places like Omaha, up toward Fort Dodge, Spencer, Iowa, and then into northeast Kansas, places like Marysville are under the gun for Sunday, and then some predictability too low labels slapped on those day 5 through 8 maps there with some discrepancies in the models, the reason for that. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let's take a look at the current state of what's going on here. As we usually do, we'll start off with our water vapor satellite imagery here. You can see quite a few things going on here. First thing that catches your eye is this big, massive trough that is centered over the eastern half of the country. Spinning, the center of it is somewhere up in here, up into eastern Canada, but the trough extends all the way down to the Gulf Coast there. Big ridge is built in behind it there across the western half of the country. There is a little spinny here. You can see there right off the Southern California coast, just kind of sitting there. A little bit of a cutoff low, little circulation there as well. And you can see this blob of moisture here making its way down into toward the North Pacific Northwest. That is going to be our main player as it digs down into the western half of the country this weekend for our severe weather event. What is going to happen is the models have some sort of convergence between these two systems here, this big wave digging down and this cutoff low here off the Southern California coast. Models have some semblance of them either phasing or interacting with each other, although they're showing a little bit of model discrepancy in that regard. Not going to be too much of an issue as far as how they interact. I think this wave up here in the Pacific Northwest is going to be so potent in itself that what this cutoff is going to do is not really going to matter. But we'll show you some model output and how these two systems interact on different models here coming up. We'll take a look now at our a little closer to home here, a little bit zoomed in. This is our 500 millibar map, and you can see this just massive trough here extending all the way into the central Gulf there, with a big ridge building in behind it. And you can see that this ridge trough pair is pretty much dominating the United States right now. And we've talked about this on occasion before. When you have a trough ridge pair that is this large, i.e. the wavelength between the axis of the ridge and the axis of the trough are very, very long. In comparison to the size of the United States, it's about the same. When that's the case, the trough doesn't really move anywhere. The system doesn't really move anywhere at all, and that's been the case with this trough here. It's just been kind of sitting out here across the eastern half of the country, and it hasn't been doing much at all. But as this wave approaches the Pacific Northwest and starts to dig down, it's going to push this trough out here, kind of flatten the pattern a little bit, give us some more zonal flow before that trough on the west coast really starts to dig in and affect our weather come the end of this weekend into early next week. Let's look at our surface pattern now, and we'll take a look at what's going on here. You can see some sort of surface low centered all the way up here into Canada, some sort of frontal zone maybe down here into the central U.S. A little bit of a surface low down here across the Red River region. Not much going on here, though, across the southern portion of the U.S. Not a whole lot going on in general here on this surface pattern. But as we move into our surface data, you'll see what the issue might be for this upcoming system. First of all, you can see we have basically northerly winds across Kansas and Oklahoma, westerly winds here across Texas, veering to southwesterly there across toward the Gulf Coast, southerly and southwesterly winds across Arkansas into Louisiana and the Gulf Coast states there. But take a look at the green numbers. Those are our dew points, and you can see how meager the dew points are out here. Oklahoma City right now, 39-degree dew point, mid to upper 40s here down into Texas. As we go to the east, much more bleak outlook here. Dew points in the 20s across much of Mississippi into Alabama, low to mid 30s there across the Louisiana Gulf Coast. And what happened was we had some severe weather in Oklahoma on several days ago, last weekend, along a cold front. And that cold front came through and has swept all the moisture well into the Gulf, taking all the moisture with it. We'll go to our southern Texas sector here, and you can see even at Brownsville and Corpus Christi, down here where the moisture likes to stick around, dew points only in the mid-40s here. Some buoys out in the Gulf, out in the western Gulf, showing mid to upper 40s dew points as well. So our moisture reserve has been swept well into the Gulf, and that's going to be the main caveat with this system, is how fast and how robust is the moisture return going to be. We probably won't start to see moisture start to return until maybe tomorrow, Friday evening at the earliest, as the winds start to flip around, as that trough starts inching in. You know, as I said, if this was May and we had a reservoir of 50s and 60s dew points down here that was readily available to get swept northward, then this would be a significant severe weather outbreak. But because the moisture is going to be limited, it looks like, and we still have lots of caveats on how fast and how robust that moisture return is going to be. That's going to perhaps be something that holds this system back from realizing its potential ceiling as far as severe weather goes. So let's go ahead. This is our zoomed out pattern here, initialized on the GFS here. You can see the big old trough here across the east, ridge over the west here, cutoff low spinning off of the west Southern California coast there. And here is our big old wave that is going to be moving down into the Pacific Northwest and into the Plains region for our potential severe weather event on Sunday. And you can see what happens here, that as that wave moves in to the Pacific Northwest, this trough pushes out here. We get kind of more of a flattened, sort of de-amplified pattern here, and then eventually we get that trough to really start digging down and sort of phase with that cutoff low off the Southern California coast. So let's go ahead and take a look at some model data here. We'll start off with the NAM. 12Z NAM is out to 84 hours, which is Sunday evening, so Monday at 0Z, Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So let's go ahead and start here. So you can see the initialization here as we go forward in time. You can see what happens. That ridge breaks down as that trough moves in. That Canadian trough moves well off to the east. And we get this west coast trough to really start to dig down. And you can see by 0Z Monday, 7 p.m. Sunday, it's centered somewhere over the kind of Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota triple point there. You know, something to note here, there is going to be a hurricane off the west coast of Mexico. Not going to be an issue with this system at all. But here's our cutoff low. It doesn't really phase with the main jet. You can see the main jet streak is right here over Colorado and New Mexico, ejecting into the Central Plains. Nice divergence aloft here across that Nebraska-Iowa region. Again, we've talked about divergence and defluence aloft a lot here on this channel. When the air spreads apart aloft, it leaves a void here. And how the atmosphere wants to fill that void is lift air from below and allow it to rise and fill that void aloft. And that creates rising motion, which is favorable for severe storms. So now we move on to the GFS here. This is the 12Z GFS. You can see much of the same initializations here. But we'll notice some differences here on the GFS. The GFS really likes to phase that cutoff low with the trough. Kind of regenerates itself there off the Baja coast there by Sunday evening. But you can see the timing differences here. Here is where that trough is centered, somewhere over right near Salt Lake City there, on the same time as we looked at on the NAM, Sunday at 7 p.m. You can see it is well back to the west, with mainly just generally southwesterly flow across much of the plains into the upper Midwest there. Still looks to be somewhat of a short wave there, some divergence aloft here across that Iowa-Nebraska region, but may mean that the timing is a little bit delayed here with this system as the main trough starts to move in late Sunday night, early Monday morning. And then beyond that, we get that cutoff low to kind of regenerate itself and move into Texas and Oklahoma there for another bout of potential severe weather into the middle of next week. Now let's compare this with the Euro model. This is going to be the 0Z Euro. The 12Z run is not quite in yet, so we'll use the 0Z. So this is our Euro model, as we said. You can see the trough moving into the Pacific Northwest is going to push off that Canadian trough well off to the east and out of here. But you can see what happens. The Euro is much more progressive than the GFS, closer to the NAM solution. Really, this main wave has nothing to do with this cutoff low here. It kind of just allows it to sit out there off the Baja coast, and this main jet streak moves into the Central Plains. Now you can see where it's centered, somewhere here over western Nebraska, very similar to what the NAM was showing. Main jet streak moving into Kansas and Oklahoma there, nice divergence aloft there across that Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri region. So the overall synoptic scale pattern, at least at 500 millibars, is very, very similar. All the models have some sort of big, potent trough here. We'll go back this up a little bit. All the models have some sort of big, potent trough here across the central portion of the country. We just have some timing differences to work out. And again, how this cutoff low phases with this trough may have a little bit to do with maybe how strong or how amplified this main wave gets. But again, I think the main wave itself is going to be strong enough on its own that we won't really have anything that we need to pay attention with this cutoff low, at least for this Sunday setup here. So you can see, the pattern is the same among the models. Big closed low here at 500 millibars, just some timing differences. The Euro and the NAM a little bit more progressive. The GFS hangs back a little bit. Surprisingly, usually the GFS is a little bit more progressive itself than the Euro model, and it usually likes to be a little bit quicker with these systems. That's kind of flip-flopped here. The GFS is the slower one, so we'll see which one has, which one wins out. And this may have impact on the moisture return. And we'll look at that here on these models here. Let's go to the NAM moisture plot, the GFS, and the Euro surface pattern here. And we will notice some difference in the moisture return here. So you can see right now, all those browns and light greens, very, very dry air across much of the country here. You can see where at least here on the NAM, where our 50s, 60s, and 70s dew points are here, well down into the central Gulf here. And that's going to take a lot for it to get pulled back northward in time for the event on Sunday. So let's go forward here in time. We'll see what this does. And you can see we do get some semblance of moisture return starting. This little surface low here, I'm not quite sure what is causing this little surface low here. Perhaps some remnant low from the old system. I'm not quite sure. This may help pull a little bit of moisture here in the short term here toward closer to the Gulf Coast. You can see on the NAM, gets some 60s dew points up here to the Gulf Coast here by this evening into tonight. And you can see what happens here as we get that westerly flow from that big old trough here to start digging in on Friday afternoon. We get surface low development up here into the northern plains. Surface low development, that's going to help flip the winds out of the south and help start to pull this moisture northward into the central plains and Midwest for the weekend event. This is Friday night, by the way. You can still see those 60s dew points are pretty much confined here to the Gulf, maybe far south Texas. And you can see we've only got low to mid 50s here starting to creep in toward the Red River region, Louisiana, Arkansas border, etc. We go through in time here, and we do have a broad swath of 50s and 60s dew points. We can see where the 60s dew points, the NAM actually is very, very aggressive with getting the 60s dew points up there into the upper Midwest. Here's our surface low. You can see how very much what we like to call a banana surface low. It's very strung out. And often that's not a great orientation for severe weather. Just kind of a thing from experience, I've noticed that these banana lows, as opposed to a much tighter sort of surface circulation, these more strung out surface lows oftentimes are not as favorable for tornadic sort of discrete supercell events. Usually the forcing, you can tell here, is a little bit more frontal in nature, right along the cold front there. But the thing we're focusing on here is the moisture, and it gets the 60s all the way up into southern Minnesota. Right now, just from experience, the NAM does tend to sometimes overdo the moisture return. And so, this is, going to be, I'm a little skeptical of this, I'll say. It gets the mid-60s up into the Kansas-Oklahoma border area. But with a system as kinematically strong as this one, we're not going to need a ton of moisture But we're going to need some, and the NAM is very aggressive with that moisture return. Let's look at the GFS now. You can see by Friday afternoon we start to get surface low development up here into Wyoming and South Dakota there. Again, that's going to help flip those winds around from out of the south and help start pulling that moisture northward Friday evening into Saturday. And so, yeah, here's the GFS. This is Sunday evening, and you can see the differences here in the model runs here. Little pocket of 60s there, we'll disregard that. The main batch of the 60 dew point isodrosotherm here, or dew point contour, is still down here in central Texas, whereas the NAM had it all the way up into Minnesota. So very much a difference in the moisture return here as far as robustness goes for this Sunday event. But we still have mid-50s dew points up here, well into the target area, low to mid-50s dew points. And with a system as strong and kinematically impressive as this one, with the strong wind profiles as we are likely to have, we're not going to need a ton of moisture, upper 60s to 70s dew points. Mid-50s or so will get it done. It just might, limit the overall severe threat, perhaps a tornado threat as well with this system. Once again, you can see some timing differences here. We'll go back to the NAM. You can see where the low is. Again, it's strung out on both of these models, centered somewhere kind of near Sioux Falls, somewhere right in there, with 60s dew points up into southern Minnesota there on the NAM. And you can see the difference here. The low is much farther back to the west here on the slower GFS, with moisture kind of wrapping up around into southern Minnesota, with the 60s still confined to southern Texas. So big differences here on the NAM and the GFS. Let's take a look at the Euro model here. Once again, we saw that the Euro was a little bit more progressive than the GFS here. Once again, surface low development starts here late Friday into early Saturday. Moisture gets pulled northward. And so this is at 0Z Monday as well. You can see where the low is, a little bit farther, a little bit slower than what I might expect. The NAM was out in here. Euro's a little bit farther back, still a little bit farther east than the GFS, a little bit more progressive than the GFS. This is kind of a middle ground, it looks like. It has some upper 50s dew points making it all the way up here into Iowa and southern Minnesota. Yeah, you can see some upper 50s there. Some real patchy 60s there. And I'm not going to put too much faith into that at this point. That might just be a model thing. But a generally broad swath of upper 50s dew points here. 60 isodrosotherm is still well down here into Texas mostly. I think this is a nice middle ground solution for now, and one that I might lean toward at this point. Not quite as progressive as the NAM, not quite as slow as the GFS, not quite as aggressive moisture return as the NAM, but a little bit better moisture return than the GFS. This is a nice middle ground right now, this Euro solution. And this is a little bit more of a compact surface low here on the Euro. You can see located somewhere there in central Nebraska. And, this area would be nice right ahead of that surface low, nice and favorable for, a little bit more back surface winds, a little bit better moisture return here on the Euro. And perhaps a better chance for severe weather. If this comes to fruition, this might be a little bit of an increase in severe weather chances here, despite still somewhat meager dew points. The dew points will be adequate here, at least on the Euro solution. So as you can see, some very big model discrepancies at this point, and that's why they're kind of hanging back with the overall sort of severe weather potential for this upcoming event. And, as we saw, the GFS hangs back, the moisture return not as robust. The more progressive models, the NAM and the GFS, get that moisture up a little bit more quickly. A little bit stronger surface low here from the Euro gets a little bit more moisture in. Again, I like that Euro solution as kind of a middle ground for now. Realizing that we are still several days out and that these solutions will start to converge as the days progress toward Sunday here. Just for fun here, let's take some soundings just to kind of compare the environment here. We'll take one down here from northern Iowa here on the GFS. Let's take a look right in there. That would be kind of the most favorable region there. Euro does not allow soundings here on Pivotal, but we'll kind of compare the environment here. So you can see the NAM has a pretty robust profile here, at least as far as a wind profile goes, and that's not surprising. Low-level jet should be fairly strong here. I'll just take a quick look at what the NAM is showing for the low-level jet. Let me zoom in here to our Midwest sector. This is 850 millibar winds Sunday evening. You can see very, very strong low-level jet here across Kansas, Nebraska, into Iowa there. Not surprising given such a strong surface low there. Well-defined surface low, the mass response that would favor a strong low-level jet. So very strong wind profiles here. You can see the thermodynamics are a little bit lacking. We do get 60s dew points up here, but you can see the surface temperatures are cool. We do know that is a NAM bias. The NAM tends to be a little bit cooler at the surface, so if we do get temperatures up into the 70s, this little capping inversion here wouldn't be too much of an issue. NAM definitely has the most instability of any model here. We look at the GFS. You can see that the wind profile is much of the same, but much more meager instability here. On the GFS, you can see it. GFS has temperatures into the 70s, which would be unfavorable with the dew point profile that the GFS is showing. Would really heighten those temperature dew point spreads at the surface and make for more of a damaging wind threat than a tornado threat. You can see that the instability is very meager here, given the low dew points and that lack of moisture return here on the GFS, whereas the NAM, better potential for surface-based storms, assuming that this surface temperature is a little bit low. If we get surface-based storms in this environment, if the instability is a little bit stronger than predicted, this wind profile would be a little bit concerning. You can see almost 500 meters squared per second squared effective SRH, bulk shear, approaching 35 knots there. So this would favor supercells, at least rotating storms. Very strong wind profile there. You can see a little bit of a kink there in the hodograph, some decent bit of veer back signature in the hodograph there. And there's a lot of debate on this. I find that if it's sort of below a certain level, and I'm still figuring out what that level is. If it tends to be below about 3 kilometers, I find that it's more favorable. If it's below 3 kilometers, or the lower that little kink or that backing is in the hodograph, the more likely it is for a little bit more messy storm mode in here. And you can see that starts to curve back on itself about 2 kilometers aloft. And then makes that real nice loop-de-loo there. Something we'll have to watch, something that might get worked out, and it's just a model kink. But nonetheless, I think low-level shear would be there for some tornado threat with any supercells that fire if we can get enough instability here in this setup. So, that's just some early look at the models here. Let's look at the long range beyond this. We'll go back to our 500 millibar chart here on both the GFS and the Euro. We'll take a look at beyond this sort of Sunday event here. So we'll keep on going here past Sunday. You can see this is our Sunday event. We move on through the week, and so what happens here is you kind of have that cutoff low. This is our main trough here on the GFS, moves in, severe weather event on Sunday. Cutoff low kind of sticks out there, somewhat tries to phase with the trough, but kind of stays, and then we get kind of this other sort of separation. We get two kind of low centers here. One up here in kind of western South Dakota, then one down here across the desert southwest that may be some remnants of that old system there, and that moves into the southern plains there. Very compact, potent looking trough here. May have a severe weather threat associated with this. Going to go over to the ECMWF now, take a look at how it responds here, and you can see a little bit of the same here. Kind of keeps that separate area, separate troughiness here. Not quite as robust as on the GFS, but would have maybe some severe threat but it all depends on moisture here. All depends on moisture. There will be a cold front associated with this surface low. If it sweeps the moisture out, then we wouldn't have any severe threat coming up. We do have some semblance of moisture return there into South Texas, so it may be severe threat down there toward the early middle portion of the week there. Let's look at the GFS. And let's see if it sweeps the moisture toward early and middle of next week. You can see that the moisture really sticks around there, surface low development there into Texas, so that may be something to watch there. Early to middle portion of next week, somewhere from northern Texas all the way down through the southern portion of Texas, if that trough does come to fruition there, would be some severe weather threat there for parts of Texas and the Gulf Coast there. Then we move on out here, looking farther beyond that. We will go ahead and look at the GFS here. So that trough moves on out, and you can see another wave right behind this one. Again, a lot's going to depend on moisture return, how much of that moisture is swept. Lots of times when these successive systems come here in these fall and winter events, the moisture is really an issue with the later waves in the wave train. But nonetheless, very favorable looking 500 millibar pattern for severe weather here if the moisture is available. We'll take a look at the Euro here, and this would be for looking toward late next week, early next weekend. European model here as we go through, and you can see so it is modeling. We do have some consistency here. Secondary wave dropping down here behind, just like the GFS, but again, moisture return is going to be somewhat of an issue. Perhaps even another wave behind this one as well. So overall, I think we're going to have a pretty active pattern here going into the next next week or so at least here across the U.S. Lots of discrepancy after that point. But looking like at least some semblance of severe weather is on tap for starting late this weekend into early next week, perhaps a series of waves. Again, lots going to depend on the degree of moisture return and how fast that moisture swept out after each successive wave. But it looks like we will have some severe weather threat here. Central Plains to upper Midwest here, starting on Sunday, maybe into Monday as well. Then Tuesday, focusing down here into Texas and the Gulf Coast region, potentially. Again, we're still several days out, so the models are going to start converging on a solution as the days progress here, getting closer to the event. But for now, it looks like some semblance of severe weather for this weekend up here, Central Plains into the southern upper Midwest, and then early next week for parts of Texas into the Gulf Coast. We'll have to watch for severe weather. So it's kind of just an overview of what's going on right now. Again, we'll do forecast discussion videos as the setup gets closer, perhaps starting as early as Saturday or Sunday, and we'll do them as needed as severe weather presents itself over the coming days. So thanks for watching. We will see you in the next video.